Hi, you are now listening to an episode of What is Your Story by Noisy Podcast. Enjoy!
Hi, my name is Jesse, and this is my story. My name is Jesse, and I'm a writer, and I have actively navigated, a bunch of things during different spaces. But I would say that one thing that has really stood out for me would be mental health. So sometime in 2021, I decided to head off for NYSC. It was an interesting journey because when I was headed off to camp, I ended up going to camp in Bielsa. It was really far, just some distance. I'd never been to Bielsa before, and somehow I was a little stoked for it because I'm like, new spaces, new experiences. It helps not have just been in the same place your whole life. So I head off to Bielsa, and it goes a little seamlessly while at camp. Originally while out there, I don't know a ton of people, but you meet a bunch of people, you make new friends. But one of the major things is that the irony of being in camp is you're surrounded by a lot of people, but somehow you're still a little isolated. You find yourself actively having individual experiences that you can't really share with anyone else because it's just like no one else is coming from what exactly it is that you're coming from. And I would say while it built up a little anxiety, the whole time in my head I'm just like, it's just 3 weeks. You navigate, you get through it. So when that ended, I was supposed to head back to Lagos, where I already lived. But somehow I ended up in Ibadan for the rest of my NYSC. So moving to Ibadan was a big change because it meant, for that period I was mostly living on my own. I had a job in Lagos before NYSC started up, but that meant also I had to manage that job remotely while navigating whatever it was that I was doing while I lived in Ibadan. So new environment, new spaces, you're on your own most of the time. And while doing that, you're still trying to navigate the journey of just being a young person that wants to figure out what they want to do next. In that space, I felt like I already knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to work in tech, I wanted to do this, I wanted to be a writer, and yada, yada, yada. And being in that space in Ibadan, it just felt very far from where it was that I wanted to be and what it was that I wanted to do. It didn't also help that being isolated in that space, you spend a lot of time wanting to actively talk to somebody or talk to other people about what it is that you're going through. But in that space, it sort of felt like, one, you didn't get to do that a lot, but two, also, even the people that you might get to speak with while in that location didn't necessarily share the experiences that I had. And it didn't help that I was swamped with work as well. So I'd be at work a lot of times and just find out that I was zoning out. Work was packed. We'd spend a lot of time very busy, navigating a lot of things, working on outreaches. And by the time that you head back, you realize that while you've been outside of your home the entire time, you've spent a substantial amount of that time living in your head. Because you're zoned out, you're not in it. And I think that was the first time I figured out what disassociating was, because that weird thing where you just randomly Google something that's never happened before. It's sort of like, what happens, or how does it feel? What's it called when you're here but you're not here? And that's exactly what it was. It just felt like, and this is how I often describe it to people. It just sometimes feels like you're playing a video game. That's exactly how it feels. And while navigating that, I'm just like, it's probably how the adult life is. This is probably how adulthood is. It's just really stressful, really tiring. And it always feels like you're not really present. But sometime while navigating that, I realized that it was also very mentally tasking. And, after weeks of work, I'm describing to a friend of mine. And I say, this is exactly how I felt for most of the week. This is exactly how it felt for a while. Thinking that, on the other end, the person would be like, oh yes, that's exactly how it is with work. Ironically, it was not that way. And this person's like, I don't think that that's normal. That's not something that, yes, people get stressed and deal with stuff a lot, but you are not being in a constant space of disassociation. It's not something that is commonplace. So that week, actually, I think I really just packed up all my stuff and went back to Lagos. And during that time, I said, I think, so I decided to actually see a therapist. At that time, I had a substantial amount of people around me who had access to these sort of resources. So they said, okay, I'll speak to someone. And I got to see a therapist. And I think one of the bigger things I learned while being at therapy is, first off, I think everybody should go to therapy. Not necessarily because it's like a thing that helps you fix whatever it is you're dealing with. But you find that the therapy is really just a lot of whys. It just really tries to help you introspect and understand, why do you feel the way you do? Why does your mind react to particular things the way it does? How best can you move things around to ensure that you're constantly in like an optimal space of mind? And you'll be surprised that simply by having like these little conversations, very often you find out the most interesting things about yourself. I think at that time I found out that I was someone who I enjoyed being in communities, but I also enjoyed doing work that mattered. And it felt like being in that space didn't cater to any of those things.
Are you enjoying the episode so far? If you love stories that make you feel at home, check out our anthology, A Man and a Woman and Other Stories. You can get a copy of this book through the link in our description box below or at Roving Heights Bookstore. Now let's get back to the episode.
And I think that that's something that therapy does. Therapy has a way of exposing you to yourself. But also, I think one major thing it did for me was, when I cleared out of that, I remember I called a friend and said, I think that it's very insane that people have not had this much access to therapy before now. Or people have not understood that, mental health resources can do so much for you as an individual. And, I think it's also sort of because of the way mental health has been framed for the longest time. But you find that even a lot of times, many of the problems that we deal with, you write in your journal, I don't know why I'm dealing with this thing. A lot of times, minor resources in mental health just, help you navigate and understand yourself a lot better. So we actively had that conversation, and we're like, we should set up something to help build resources for people in mental health. And it's not just like, go to therapy. You're talking about just minimal resources, whether that's like you're sharing on social channels or you're just building communities or hosting events for people to be at, to just sort of understand that these are things that give to you as a person. And I think one of the bigger things for that as well, we decided to call that community Uncloudy. And one of the bigger things for us at Uncloudy was realizing that the way community works, you give to communities and communities give back to you. Being as a part of a community usually means that it sort of feels like being a branch of a tree. Basically, you are a part of something that continues to feed you. But I think one of the bigger things that period also did for me was helping me become a better writer. Before that point, I never had thought that being a writer was something that I was as much invested in preceding that period. But one thing that taking the time to focus on your emotional health does for you is it forces you to introspect. And introspection does a lot of work in helping you become a better writer. And during that period of time afterwards, it started out with me just wanting to write about my personal experiences or write to understand myself better. Eventually I decided that, or I realized that writing, even just like fiction or just like writing stories to put out, it sort of gave the introspection that being in therapy had helped to do as well. And I really think that there's so much opportunity for us as people to learn to understand ourselves better through therapy, through mental wellness, through emotional wellness, and everything in that space. You often realize, having navigated that there's so little that we really understand about ourselves. But more than anything else, I think that with the way that our world constantly is, it always often just feels like there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of messages, and it feels like most messages are trying to drive you to tell you need to do more, you need to be more. And sometimes I think one of the bigger things I have learned as well is, for myself, I don't necessarily need to live life outside in. I don't need to live life based on the messages that I have picked up from the outside. Sometimes it has to be lived from inside out. I need to do the introspection to understand what are the things that I need to do to put myself in a place that I know that I can be happy and proud of. And I think that that's something that introspection and just focusing on emotional health really did for me as well. I would say long term, I am someone who's looking forward to not just helping to build community at Uncloudy with just emotional and mental health as well, but also just continuing to do the work of introspection to just sort of understand myself as a person, and continuing to just be, I want to say, a great writer who actively gets to talk about these individual experiences that people go through and how it shapes our lives and communities and people around us. So I want to sort of point, I'd sort of just say, I don't want to say go to therapy today, but I would just think that there is so much that investing in our emotional health can do for us as people. And it doesn't necessarily, especially as a guy, it doesn't necessarily just have to be a thing where you struggle with having stifled emotional expression. Sometimes it is. It's just as little as knowing why you do the things you do, and I think that there's so much potential in that. So, yeah. So I think altogether, there is a lot of strength in being able to chart where it is that we're supposed to be and go next as people, especially as young people. I mean, a lot of times, and this is something that's happened to me fairly often, we sometimes just look at things that people have done and think to ourselves, this is something that's really cool, and that is what I should be doing. But there's something in being able to just step back and do the work, and just get into yourself as a person. Journaling helps me very much. And I think that I journal about the most absurd things. I think my Apple Notes has really gone through it with me, in honesty. But I sometimes just walk through my journal and I find the most interesting conversations about myself. And time after time, week after week, I just see myself picking up things and realizing that these are things I find pleasure in. These are things that I feel like a better person for. These are the things that make me happy. These are the things that make me feel good. And I think that there is so much in that. But outside of just immersing ourselves and understanding ourselves, I think that there's so much involved in interacting with people as well. So as much as we've done the work to understand ourselves, I think that people are an essential part of our lives. And doing the work to build the communities around us, I think that there's so much invested in that. So I would say that if I had to do it all over again, I think that I would invest a lot in people and communities and those around me, in just knowing that I'm giving to these people and they're giving back as well in terms of interpersonal interactions.
We hope that you enjoyed listening to this episode of What is Your Story by Noisy Podcast. If you would like to be a guest on this show, click on the link in the description box below. Don't forget to share, leave a comment, and like this episode. Also follow us on social media at Noisy Streets. Okay, see you same time next week. Bye.